What is up, guys? TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got a Dogmatika Shaddoll deck profile. And so I've been testing a few different builds of Dogma Shaddolls for a while now, and so far this has been my favorite for its power, versatility, and most importantly, its consistency. And this deck is able to be consistent because we're playing so many different starter cards. And so I see a lot of other Shaddoll decks mostly relying on Construct and the Fusion spells to really get their plays going, but in this deck we have that on top of also having Jet Synchron and Nadir Servant to start our plays for us as well. So we have so many different starter cards making this consistent, but also we have more power cards as well because of, again, Nadir Servant, but also things like the Red Eyes engine to go into cards like Red Eyes Dragoon, which are just simply absurd. And I've actually come up with a combo going first. If you just have Jet Synchron plus a discard, I haven't seen this combo anywhere else by the way, but Jet Synchron plus discard equals Dragoon and then Winda. So you're locking your opponent out of special summons obviously with the Winda, but then you're backing that up with the Dragoon Negate, also just a huge monster on its own. It's just an incredibly difficult board for a lot of decks to deal with, and usually it's going to be an auto win. And then when you go second, that same setup of just Jet Synchron plus discard is an OTK if your opponent has an extra deck monster on board. And so I'm actually going to start this deck profile off by showing you these combos. That way it's going to contextualize all of the card choices. So you're going to see the ratios and everything that I'm playing and the explanations, and you're gonna be able to think about that with the knowledge of what this deck actually does. And I think that's gonna help you guys make your own choices even better as well. And so let's just go ahead and get into the profile. We're gonna start with the combos once again. Alright, so moving into the combos, for the first one, all you're going to need is one copy of Jet Synchron, and then just anything in your hand to discard for Jet Synchron's effect. And then once again, this is going to allow you to end on a board of Dragoon plus Winda, which is an auto win by most measures. And so the way the combo works is you start by just normal summoning Jet Synchron, going into your copy of Linkuriboh, activating Jet Synchron's effect by discarding the random card in your hand, special summon back the Jet Synchron, and then link into a Needle Fiber. These sleeves are impossible to pick up, but link into a Needle Fiber. Next, from here, you're going to activate Needle Fiber's effect, using it to special summon a copy of Shaddoll Falco from your deck, because Falco is a tuner. So now that you have Falco on board, you can link your Halkifi Brax into a copy of Linkross, using that to get 2 tokens. And now these tokens cannot be used for link summons, but you can use them for the effects of link monsters. And so we're going to attribute a token to revive our copy of Linkuriboh. And from here we can link the Linkuriboh and the Linkross into a copy of Proxy F Magician, one of the best additions to this deck out of Eternity Code. It's just a common, so it's easy to pick up, but it does allow you to fuse with monsters that are on your side of the field. And so from here we can activate Proxy F Magician's effect to fuse with the Falco and then the token, which is a light attribute. And so we can fuse token and Falco into a copy of Construct. So then we can activate Construct and Falco's effect. So we can do Chainlink 1 Construct, Chainlink 2 Falco to protect from Ash. And so special summon back the Falco, Construct effect. And here it's just important to send something that you can use to fuse on your opponent's turn. And so for that we can either send a El Shaddoll Fusion or Shaddoll Schism. It's really up to you which one you prefer. Fusion is, I mean, they have their pros and cons. I'll talk about that later, but for the sake of the combo, I'm just going to dump Fusion. Then from here, we can link away the Construct and the Proxy F Magician into a copy of Predaplant Verte Anaconda. Now we activate Shaddoll's Construct's effect to add back our Shaddoll Fusion. So we have Falco set, Anaconda, and then El Shaddoll Fusion in hand. From here we can activate Anaconda's effect to send Red Eyes Fusion to the graveyard as the cost, well, and pay 2,000. And then Fusion will resolve, sending Dark Magician and Red Eyes Black Dragon from deck to the grave to fuse into a Red Eyes Dragoon, which I unfortunately have to proxy because my copy hasn't come in the mail yet, which is crazy because I pre-ordered it. So, you know, sucks to suck, but we have an Anaconda, a Dragoon, set Falco, and then you also will be setting your El Shaddoll Fusion or your Schism if that's what you search. Then on your opponent's turn, you can activate your El Shaddoll Fusion and fuse with the set Falco and the Anaconda and go into your copy of Winda. And then from here you can also activate Falco's effect to revive it. So you still end with Winda, Dragoon on your opponent's turn, and that's going to be difficult for him to deal with. Alright, so moving into the deck profile, we're going to start with 3 copies of Jet Synchron, and then 3 copies of Tuning. Sorry, one of them is a proxy, and I was not going to pick up a 3rd copy of Tuning right before a ban list, and so... but 3 copies of Jet Synchron, 3 copies of Tuning, and this is very important because, as you guys can see, Jet Synchron is one of the most important starter cards in the deck because it gives you access to your entire Shaddoll engine pretty much, because you can go into a construct and get access to anything else like that, but also access to most of your extra deck because of the number of materials that it can just generate throughout your combos. And so I think it's important to max out on the number of Jet Synchrons in this deck. It's just incredibly important. And then from here, we're going to move into the Shaddoll engine, and for that we play 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion, 3 copies of El Shaddoll Fusion, so we're maxing out on the good fusion cards, not playing Nef Shaddoll Fusion because the card's not as good, it's just a little bit too slow, you don't get anything from playing it. Like, El Shaddoll Fusion is a quick play, it's quick, you can use it on either player's turn, it's very versatile, and Shaddoll Fusion obviously has the payoff from your opponent having monsters from the extra deck, but Nef Shaddoll Fusion is just as slow and kind of clunky as Shaddoll Fusion is, but you don't get the payoff, and so I really don't think it's worth playing in the deck right now. And then the other Shaddoll spell and traps we play are 1 copy of Shaddoll Schism and then 1 copy of Re-Shaddoll Incarnation. And so only 1 copy of each of these because they're both incredibly searchable throughout the combos and with the other engines in the deck, but at the same time you don't necessarily want to draw them, and if you do need to use it multiple times, you can always add them back from the graveyard, or in in Incarnation's case, if it gets banished, you're usually not getting it back, but you want to be sure to save that effect for when you're pretty sure you're going to be winning the game that turn. And so it's usually not an issue. I do think that 1 copy of each of these is definitely correct. But that's it for the Shaddoll spell and traps. For the Shaddoll monsters, we're playing 3 copies of Shaddoll Squamata, 3 copies of Shaddoll Windy, because these are the ones that allow you to access all of the others, and so these are the ones that you want to see when you're starting your plays with one of your Shaddoll Fusion cards. You want to also have one of these as well, because that's going to give you access to everything else. Then from there we have 1 copy of Beast, 1 copy of Hedgehog, 1 Falco, and then 1 copy of Ariel. And so as you guys saw in the combo, both Falco and Ariel are very important to have in your deck, and sometimes I do consider playing multiple copies of one or both of them because if you draw it, it's very difficult to get them onto the board. But I do also want to remind you that Proxy F Magician does have another effect, to where if you're able to fuse while Proxy F Magician's on the field, then if you fuse to a zone that Proxy F Magician points to, you can special summon a monster with 1000 or less attack from your hand. And so even if you draw the Falco or the Ariel, you can always special summon them from your hand, and in Falco's case, that can be huge because it's a tuner, so that can give you access to different plays, or just getting another Shaddoll on the board to fuse with can be important. And so I think 1 copy of each of these is a great ratio. That's pretty much it for the Shaddoll monsters though. You don't want to play too many because sometimes they can be bricky if you don't have a fusion with them, but once again, Squamata and Windy are just too important to not max out on. For the Dogmatika engine, we're playing 3 copies of Nadir Servant, only 2 copies of Ecclesia, 1 copy of Fleur de Lis, and then 1 Punishment. And so we're playing a very small Dogmatika engine because in this deck, the Dogmatika cards themselves, like these 4 cards, are not as important as Servant. Servant is the main thing here because it allows you to dump cards from the extra deck to the graveyard on your turn during your main phase. And that can be very key because you can dump cards like Construct to immediately get things back to the graveyard, or more commonly, dumping App Cologne to search any of your Shaddoll cards and then discard another card from your hand, and that could allow you to trigger Shaddoll effects. And it really turns Nadir Servant into like a Shaddoll Engage pretty much, because you can activate Servant, add an Ecclesia, and then send App Cologne to the grave. App Cologne can add Beast discard beast, trigger beast effect to draw. So you search the card and then drew, and then what you search can search another card. So you can search a fleur-de-lis or a punishment for more disruption. Punishment can even dump a second app cologne and get even more advantage, and so this really does make Nadir Servant an incredible card, whereas these on the other hand are not as good to draw. They don't gain you as much advantage, but they're not bad either, especially with Punishment being a form of disruption that isn't going to lose to Droplets or Dark Ruler No More. And then Fleur-de-Lis is a way to out Dragoon. It's also just another form of disruption as well. Ecclesia and just in general a good card. And so these are all great cards, but really it's Nadir Servant carrying the load for this engine, which is why we're not playing as many copies of everything else. And now you might also be wondering, where's Maximus? And so I'm not playing Maximus in this build either, because if you don't have combo, or I should say, if you do have combo, you don't need Maximus. If you don't have combo, you're not getting anything in graveyard to get to Maximus. And so it's very difficult to summon unless you already have Servant in that case or combo. But in both of those situations, you don't need the Maximus at all, actually. Not to mention the extra deck is very, very tight, as well as the main deck. And so with space being as tight as it is, I felt that it wasn't worth giving the space to play Maximus. So that is why we're only playing this for our Dogmatika engine. And once we see the extra deck, you guys are going to see that there's really no space for anything else. And like dumping 2 cards from extra deck to the graveyard is just not as good in this deck, because sure, we can dump App Cologne, but there's not really much else that we're going to want to send outside of maybe like Intis. But if the opponent doesn't have anything, then Intis doesn't do anything, obviously. So that's it for the Dogmatika cards. Let's move into the rest of the main deck. So next we have 1 copy of Red Eyes Fusion, 1 copy of Dark Magician, and then 1 copy of Red Eyes Black Dragon. This is just a small Red Eyes engine that's going to allow us to use Anaconda to copy Red Eyes Fusion's effect, which allows us to fuse from the deck, hand, or field. And so if we draw these, we can still fuse for our Dragoon. If they're in deck, that's obviously better, but it makes it so that the deck is more consistent in its ability to get to Dragoon. We can also just draw this and then activate it from the hand. And so we have plenty of ways to summon Dragoon, and when we add that to what this deck already does, it really makes this deck so much more difficult for opponents to deal with. So I have really liked this engine a lot. Alright, my phone's running out of memory, so I have to speed this up and go a lot faster. So to finish out the main deck, 1 copy of Trick Clown. You guys already saw it. It is used for the combo, kind of a brick, but important for getting more link materials. Then finally we have 2 copies of Triple Tactical Talents, 2 copies of Forbidden Droplets, and then 1 copy of Upstart Goblin. Upstart is just because consistency is so important in this deck, obviously, and so there are no hand traps, but we are playing 2 copies of both Triple Tack and Droplets to help us going second, plus we have Shaddoll Fusion. This deck is relatively good at breaking boards, and so I found that I didn't have space to play enough hand traps. Like I maybe could only find 4 or 5 spots for hand traps, and rather than playing hand traps to where I'd be guaranteed to really only draw 1 in most hands, I felt that it would be better to play these cards like Triple Tack or Droplets that would help me do more to break a board than a hand trap or a single hand trap would do to prevent one from being made. I hope that makes more sense, but I thought that these were just more impactful as singular cards, because at the number that I could play in the deck, it just wasn't going to be enough. So that's pretty much it for the main deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of App Cologne. Yeah, 2 copies of App Cologne. Then we have 3 copies of Construct, 1 copy of Wind. That's it for the Shaddoll fusions. Double App Clone is a change from the previous build, because here we're dumping it to the graveyard more with Servant as well as Punishment, so it's more important to play extra copies. For the other fusions, we have 1 copy of Intis and then 1 copy of Red Eyes Dragoon. And that's going to be it for the fusion monsters. Then for the link monsters, we're playing 1 copy of Link Haribo, 1 Needle Fiber or Halkifi Brax, 1 Link Ross, 1 Proxy F Magician, 1 Cross Sheep, Anaconda, and Access Code. So all cards that you saw in the combo. And that's actually pretty much it for the extra deck. And as you guys saw, every single one of these cards get used. Every single one of the fusions also gets used. And so there's very little space extra in the extra deck. And again, that's why I did not want to play Maximus, because there's really nothing that we want to send. Like, you dump App Cologne and then you really don't have anything else. And there's not space for cards like Titanclad or the other things that Dogmatikas usually like to send. So this is enough, I think. I've really been enjoying this extra deck. You use every single card. There's no wasted space, no extra baggage. Just a great extra deck overall, and in general, just a great deck that I've really been enjoying. And hopefully the ban list doesn't come for a little bit longer, so there's more time to play with this deck. But as of now, I've really been enjoying it, and I hope you guys will as well. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this Dogmatika Shaddoll deck profile. I hope I explained everything well enough in that I didn't focus too much on the Jet Synchron plays, but also highlighted what this deck can do with the Dogmatika engine and what that adds to the Shaddoll engine as well. But this deck is a lot of fun, it's very powerful, and again, it's able to create these insane boards going first. Like I showed you just Jet Synchron, but it gets even better if you have like Jet Synchron plus Nadir's Servant, or there's so many other cards that you can draw in addition to your Jet Synchron. And then going second